So welcome back, guys. For today's video, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. So if you've noticed here recently, I'm doing a lot more builds of smalls that sell instead of just sitting down and explaining how people did this. Would you rather see me just sit down and break down the items like I have been, or actually build the items? Again, just leave that feedback into the comments because honestly, I enjoy doing both. So what makes this video different is that it's actually a request from our Facebook community. Russell Brown left a comment on one of my posts with this picture, saying that he needed a little help figuring this out. I figured that it would be super hard to explain just in writing, but it is a super cool build with a ton of potential. For the taller tree in this picture, which we'll be making today, they are wanting $100, when I'm almost positive that we can do that for a lot cheaper. So in today's video, I'll be breaking one down, building it for myself, and teaching you along the way. And I'm super pumped about this build because it's not something that I found out there. It's something that one of you all found. So if you like this style of video and you have some project ideas that you would like for me to build, you can head over to the Facebook page where once a week we'll be asking for submissions for videos. So thank you, Russell, for the submission. Now let's see if we can break this down so that everyone can enjoy it. So I've been prototyping the heck out of this. I have not made a full version yet, which I will in this video. But to be honest, this one really kicked my butt. I have a ton of different prototype ideas here. You know, all kinds of different angles. I thought that it would be super easy going through the different layers of this thing. Okay, so the top one only has 4 pieces, so it's just going to be 45s. Then we just have to figure out the bevel. The next one, it has 5 pieces, so it's going to be this angle, yada, yada, yada. Well, that's not how it works. Not whenever you go to adding bevels to create a cone almost. Changes everything completely, changes the math completely. But don't worry, I'm not going to be giving a huge math lesson during this video. We'll skip that part and I'll just tell you the angles and the bevels that you need. Okay, so for this build, you can pretty much use about any type of material that you want. You guess what I'm going to be using? Fence pickets. Okay, so I'm actually wanting to see what this would look like in cedar. The version that the store was selling was white. I'm actually going to change up that design just a little bit, kind of make it my own. And then I'm also going to do it out of natural wood. Who knows? I may end up doing one of each. Right now I have my pickets and I know the parts that I need. What I don't know quite yet is how much material that I'll actually be needing. But by the end of the video, we're going to know that. So let's go ahead and dive into this project. We're going to be starting off at the table saw. Okay, so to start with, I'm going to be ripping my material down to 5 1/4 inches. And that's just going to be for this size tree. The reason why I chose 5 1/4 is because I'm using 5 1/2 inch fence pickets. This is going to give me a little wiggle room to straighten out these edges. And again, at this point, I really don't know how many pickets that I'm going to need yet. But by the end of the video, I'll tell you exactly how many that we need. And just like always, I'll be teaching you every single step of this build. But if you're a plans in the hand type of person, head over to my website, and I'll throw a link in the description. Okay, so I have my material ripped down to 5 1/4 inches wide. Now we can start making our cuts. So essentially these trees are made up by different levels that can stack on top of each other. And basically where they're getting their taper with this is starting at the very top one, it has 4 sides. The next level down, it has 5 pieces. One below that, 6, all the way down to the 7th one, which is 10 different pieces. And you could keep going down with this if you'd like. I'm going to be stopping at 7 levels. Basically, you can make these things as tall or short as you want. Now, let's say that you wanted to make a set, a tall and a short tree like in this picture, and your tall one can be 7 levels high and your shorter one could be 5 levels high. So I'm going to start with the bottom level and work my way up. And from this point on, all of our cuts are going to be made with a compound miter saw. So each one of these levels will have a different compound miter, and I'll be giving you the settings as we get to them. So for this very bottom level, it's going to have the most parts. It's going to have 10 different pieces. And for this first level, we'll be setting our miter saw to 7 1/2 degrees to the left. And then we'll bevel our saw to 16 1/2 degrees to the left. Once we have that set up, we're ready to make some cuts. I'm just going to start off by making my first cut on the end. Then I'm going to flip my board over, and then I'm going to measure over 3 3/8 of an inch on the side that is closest to the fence. I'll be using that mark to start my cut. And this is what our first piece is going to look like. And then for our second cut, we'll flip the board again. And I'm going to take my first cut, put the wide side down and the shorter end against my fence, and use it to mark the rest of my cuts. This will just keep us from having to measure out each part. And really, the hard part's done for this level, and we're just going to repeat this process until we have 10 parts. Okay, so we have our 10 different parts cut, and before we move on to the next step on these, I'm just going to make sure that my math has worked out correctly. So I'm just going to roughly put these things together using some painter's tape, just to see how we're looking. And painter's tape is one of the best things in the world to have around a workshop. I mean, there's just a ton of different uses for this stuff. I actually keep several different size rolls, and very seldom do I actually use it for painting. I hate painting. I know you're probably thinking, what in the world is he doing? It's upside down. But the miters are matching up. Sweet. Okay, so this all matches up. It is all set at the angle that I wanted at, just upside down. Once it's done, it'll be something like this. Then we'll have our V-cuts on the side, which we'll be doing next. But again, I just wanted to make sure that these compound miters actually all added up to do what it's supposed to do. And this is it. I'd much rather spend a couple of minutes doing this than cutting all of my parts and finding out that none of them work. So now that we know that our angle and bevel is going to match up, before we cut our V-shaped bottoms into this, we need to see how far the next level is going to nest over the top of this. We don't want to cut our V's too deep or there won't be any wood behind it. Let's go ahead and cut our parts for our second level and get those taped up. Then we'll know exactly how deep we can make our V cuts. And then for our second level, we're going to adjust our miter to 8.5 degrees. And we'll adjust our bevel to 18 degrees. Now with our saw set up at our second level setting, we'll be cutting 9 parts total. But just like our first one, let's start with our outside edge. We'll flip our board, take a measurement from the inside of the board to 3 5/16. And then once we get this first one cut, again, we'll just use this as a template for the rest. And if you notice that I'm using the same board to mark my templates, well, that's just a lesson learned from experience. Yes, it'd be easier to use the board that you just cut as a template for each cut. But let's say that your second cut is off by a pencil mark, and then you use that board as a template, and then your next cut is off by a pencil mark. By the time that you get done, your last piece could be way off. So now let's get these taped up, see how it fits. And don't worry, this will be the last time that we'll need to tape this up. Well, don't hold me to that, because actually whenever we go to glue these up, painter's tape is really handy for holding parts together while the glue dries. So we may end up doing this again. Actually, this step you won't even have to do because we're fixing to figure out the reason why we're doing all of this. Okay. So now I'm just going to make sure that we're even going all the way around, and let's check out this overhang. All right, so I have right around 1 3/4, 2 inch overhang. So let's make our V cuts about 1.5 inches up. I'll show you how to do that. And basically I'm just going to untape all of this. And again, you won't even need to do this step. I was just doing it to figure out our V cut. We're going to find the center of the bottoms of each part and make a mark. And the bottoms are always going to be the widest part. So I'm making my mark on the top boards of my stacks. And the reason why I'm only marking these two right now is because I'm going to use those as a template. Then my next step is going to be to measure 1.5 inches up on each side. And then if I connect my center mark to that mark, this is going to be my angle. And again, I'm only going to be marking this out on my top piece because whenever we set the saw to make these cuts, we won't have to reset it. Now that I have my two top boards all lined out, let's go ahead and mark the centers on the rest of the boards. And to make this a lot quicker, I'm just going to flip my top board up, and then transfer my center mark to each board down my stack. Keep in mind I'll be doing the exact same thing for every level from this point on. Oh, got froggy. So now with our V's all marked out, let's go and get these cut. Now I can tell already that mine's not going to be as an acute of an angle as the ones that were in that picture, but I'm going to leave these as is because mine's going to be different. Okay, so back at the saw, I'm going to set everything back to 0, and we need to figure out what this angle is. I'm just going to rotate my saw until my blade matches. And it looks like it's right about 53 degrees. So let's say that your saw doesn't go to 53 degrees. Just back it off to 50 degrees. And since I'm going to be cutting small parts, put a backstop behind your workpiece. This is going to keep any little parts from flying off when you make your cut. And then for the rest of the parts, since now we have our angle set up, we can just repeat this for the remaining pieces. And then for our second level, we're going to do the exact same thing. This looks like it's going to end up being right around 55 degrees. Just to show you a workaround in case your saw doesn't go that far, instead of lining it up with the center to make your cut, you can line it up with the 1.5 inch mark on the edge. It's just going to leave a small flat spot in the center. So with my saw still set at 53 degrees, I'm just going to line it up with the 1.5 inch mark and make the cut. Now if you decide to do that, you will have to make an 1.5 inch mark on the back, at least for this first one. And we'll just repeat this cut, lining it up with our 1.5 inch mark. And with my first one cut, I'm just going to be using this as my template. Okay, so we have all of the parts for our first 2 levels cut. Let's go ahead and cut the parts that we need for the remaining 5 levels, and we'll start putting this thing together. And for our third level, we'll be setting our angle to 9.5 degrees and our bevel to 20.5. Then I'll just make my first cut just like I did for the others. And then for this third level, we're going to measure across the top to 3 1/8, make our mark, and then we're ready to make our repeat cuts. And to make this even easier, instead of using my first one as a template, I'm just going to put a piece of painter's tape on my fence and use that as a guide for my cuts. Honestly, you can do it either way. Then once I have 8 of those cut, we're going to move on to our fourth level, which will be needing 7 parts with the miter set at 11 degrees and our bevel set at 23.5 degrees. For this one, we're going to measure across our top 2 3/4 inch and we're ready to cut. And then for level 5, we'll be needing 6 parts. We'll set our miter to 13 degrees and our bevel to 27.5 degrees. The measurement across the top for this one will be 2 1/8. And then for level 6 and 7, I'm going to be putting a sacrificial board in just to close the throat of my saw. This will keep the saw blade from throwing these small parts. Now you can either clamp this board in place or use some double-sided tape. And then for level 6, we'll be needing 5 pieces. Our miter is going to be set at 16 degrees and our bevel set at 32.5 degrees. And for this top measurement, it'll be 1.5 inch. As you can tell, our top measurements are getting smaller and smaller, which is going to create this coned Christmas tree look. And then for our top piece, or our spire, we're going to be needing 4 parts with the miter saw set at 22 degrees and the bevel at 40.5. And the top measurement for these last 4 will only be 1 inch. Alright, so now that we have all of our pieces cut, and your head may have exploded with all these different miters and bevels and all of this stuff, but don't let that deter you from making this because it's not that hard at all. The hardest part, I've already done it for you, so piece of pie. So now with the rest of our layer pieces cut, I'm going to go ahead and mark my center, measure up 1.5 inches on each one of these, and then we'll add our V-cuts. So I get a lot of questions about how I got into woodworking. What makes me so passionate about it? So while I'm getting the parts ready and making these cuts, I'll dive into it for a minute. Growing up in a coal mine community, there really wasn't a whole lot of extra money. So basically I had to entertain myself and stay outside all day. Luckily I grew up on a family farm and there was plenty to do. The only thing that it took was a little bit of imagination. That's when I started putting things together like tree houses, using old scrap wood and used nails. And I guess that's probably where my love for woodworking came from, was being able to take a pile of scrap wood and actually create something out of it. And maybe that's why I like these non-traditional builds and using non-traditional material. Maybe it's because I grew up using non-traditional material. Now, if I were to go over my entire entrepreneur/woodworking journey, we would be here for a long time because I've had several different businesses and my story's pretty interesting. So maybe during some of these repetitive parts of a project, I'll start unfolding the entire story. Or maybe I'll just sit down and record it one day. But that's all going to have to wait because I'm just finishing up these last cuts. All right, so we have all of our pieces cut, making sure to keep them in order. So we know that we go from our bottom all the way up to our top with only 4. Now for this next step is going to be completely optional. I'm going to add in just some decorative lines. Okay, this is just going to help to break this up a little bit, and it's going to look something like this. And I'm going to add these in using a jigsaw. So to get this spacing, I'm just going to measure up 1/2 inch and 1.5 inches on each side of my point. Then once I have those marked, I'm going to go up about 1/2 inch at each one of those marks. So like this. So for this part, you can measure all of these out if you would like. You can actually probably stack 4 on top of each other and make these cuts at once. Or you can just mark your 1/2 inch and your 1.5 inches and kind of just eyeball the length. I think by doing that, it's going to make this look a lot more authentic and a lot more homemade. But completely up to you. And to find my 1/2 inch, 1.5 inch spacing on the rest of my levels, I'm just going to use the one that I just marked as a template. Makes things a lot quicker. And with little things like this, get creative. I'm putting 2 in, but for some of the larger pieces, you may want to put in 3 or 4 at different lengths. Okay, so now that we have all of our little decorative cuts put in, let's go ahead and sand these up real quick and put these babies together. And here's a little tip. If you have a lot of edge sanding to do, just flip your sander upside down and kind of use it like a belt sander. These smaller pieces are harder to sand with a random orbit sander anyway. It always seems to want to grab an edge and throw it. And this step is really just to knock the rough edges off. We can always do a little more sanding after each level is put together. Okay, so now that we have all of our pieces sanded up, let's go ahead and glue these things together. Now there's a couple of different ways that you can do this. You can just use standard wood glue and wait for all of this to dry, or you can use wood glue and CA glue. That's completely up to you. If you're using just regular wood glue, then you can use painter's tape on all of the joints so that it acts like a clamp. I'm going to be using the combo and save some painter's tape. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just start with my top piece. And looks like I still have a little bit of sanding to do whenever I get done. Let's go ahead and put these together. All right, so there's our little top piece. I think it looks pretty cool. Let's put the rest of these together real quick. All right, so there we have it. The base. All these need to be cleaned up just a bit with a sander, but this is essentially how it's going to go down. Kind of offset these. We got these stacked up. You can glue these into place, or you can leave them where they're stackable. That way that you can put them away. Pretty cool. Let's get this finished up. All right, so this thing is looking awesome just as is. The final sanding really set everything off, and we are right at about 27 inches tall, and we have used 2.5 fence pickets. So since this is cedar, this cost me right around 10 bucks. But if you're going to paint this, you could just use regular pine pickets. It only costs you around 5 bucks. So yes, I originally said I'm going to do the entire thing just out of cedar. I'm not going to add any paint, anything like that, but I kind of had an idea. The little decorative cut marks that we added in, it kind of gets lost with all of the different seams and things like that. So I was thinking, what if we did something like this? Just add some paint along the bottom of this and just along this bottom edge, just to give it a little bit of contrast right here. And then when we put a finish on this, the natural wood will pop. So we'll kind of picture this look at each level and make your decision. So now we know what this will look like without the white. It looks good. It's a nice, solid cedar looking tree. But I'm going to go ahead and paint the edges like that. And if we like the other way better, then just don't paint them. But so one way to find out what it's going to look like. And so for the sake of not knowing until you try, we're painting the ingrained bottoms and just above our little grooves that we cut in with a jigsaw. And if you get a little bit too heavy with your paint, you can always sand this down a little bit once it dries. Is it going to look better than it did before? Honestly, I have no clue, but we're about to find out. So, what do you think about that? I think that it looks fantastic, and personally for me, I love the white against the natural wood. Just kind of sets everything off. And we are pretty much done. Again, this took 2.5 fence pickets. You can make these for around $5 a piece, and you could speed all of this up just by bashing out the parts. Now, from this point on, anything else that you do to it will just be adding your own twist, and I encourage that. There's a ton of different options and ideas that you could do with this thing to make it even more awesome. Now, you could leave it just like this, where all of the pieces are loose. That way, at the end of the year, you could take all of these down for storage, or you can go ahead and glue and fasten all of these levels up into place. But this has been a super fun build and a little challenging to figure out, but we got it. So thanks again, Russell, for the challenge or the request. And again, if you have something like this that you're trying to figure out, send it over my way and it may be the next video. And we have done it again. We've created something super unique and awesome by just using common materials. And like I say all the time, one of the most important parts about this build is just believing that you can do it. I admit, I ran into some roadblocks trying to figure out all of these different angles. But what if I'd just given up on it? Then I wouldn't be able to teach all of you guys how to build these. So you know where I'm going with this. The person that stares you back in the mirror every morning is the only person that is holding you back from doing anything that you want. But you have to take that first step. And you know what that is. Get up, get out, and get your build on. Till next time, we'll see ya. Imagine taking a pile of wood and turning it into something amazing. Now, imagine doing that without years of frustration. You do not need a fancy workshop, expensive tools, or years of experience. With Woodworking Kickstart, you'll build confidence and real skills in no time. So you can spend years making mistakes and learning the hard way like I did, or you can start building with confidence today. So join me in Woodworking Kickstart and let's get your journey started.